We'll start a new series highlighting players every day. We'll start off with the top name in the 2024 NHL Draft, the prospect spotlight for Macklin Celebrini, on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, joined by Sebastian High, and on today's show, we'll be starting a new series where we highlight a player every day and break down their game in detail. We'll do a deep dive on Macklin Celebrini in today's player spotlight. We'll start out by talking about the tools, overall, the puck skills, and how he plays on the puck, stick handling, shooting, and passing overall. We'll spend our second segment talking more about the overall toolkit and the habits in Celebrini's game and how those project. Then we'll end things off with an overall idea of how he projects, where he's projected to play in the lineup, what type of player you're getting, how many points he's going to get, and finally, what type of team would be the best fit. Before I get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. And make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So, Sebastian, I don't think there's any doubt with Celebrini going at first overall. I'm looking at his elite prospects page here, which has where he's ranked in every single ranking they can find, basically, and not a single number two. He's at number one all over the page here. So yeah, talk me through Celebrini's type of Celebrini's overall, frame, how he plays, and what type of player he's getting, and then we'll get into the tools in terms of puck skills.
For sure. Celebrini is very young for the draft class. He's a June 13th, 06 birthday, and he's a 6 foot, 190 pound left shot centerman. And he is electric. And he is really, really capable in all three zones of the ice and just overall a fantastic player. I don't think that, at least between the two of us, that we've really had any debate about Celebrini at once since maybe September. And even that was like debate for the sake of debate, perhaps. And he's a fascinating player with an excellent toolkit. He's playing with Boston University in the NCAA, and he's lighting up college hockey as by far the youngest player playing in college hockey this season. So there's a lot to like with Celebrini, and the overall puck skills are a massive strength, right? Like the passing game, the goal scoring, and the handling are all stand out well above average and really solid tools, even among like past first overall picks. Like this is a very, very, very intriguing prospect.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And we could start off with the stick handling. I think the hands are really, really good. He's got an unlocked top hand, a lot of range of motion as well. He can go from fully to the right to fully to the left in a split second. He can control pucks either in tight between his legs or really out wide when he's receiving bad passes. His ability to corral pucks and go from receiving a puck to making a play in motion is fantastic. In terms of overall grade for a stick handling ability, it's especially evident in transition, but I'd give him a solid 7.5, right, out of 10. Like this is a really
Yeah.
good tool in his game.
For sure. Like the rating scale that we're going to be using in these episodes is the one that we use at Dubber Prospects. It
Yeah.
is a 1 to 10 scale where 5 represents a standard NHL projection. Think third line forward, number 4 defenseman in terms of quality. And we do that with a ton of tools. But yeah, so for the handling specifically, I think in my viewings, a 7.5 has been the kind of consistent that I've seen. There's been some games where he's really, really aggressive with his puck handling, trying a lot of things. And I've seen it like maybe glimmer all the way up to an 8 in some viewings, but
Yeah.
it's not the same level as like another player that we'll be covering this week in these profiles, Ivan Demidov, whose puck skills and puck handling specifically is a 10 in my personal opinion from what
Yeah,
I've seen so far this season. And in the last couple drafts, I haven't seen a player that can handle the puck like Demidov. And while Celebrini isn't at quite that level, it is more than enough to facilitate his style of play and allow him to dominate games.
absolutely. And passing wise, this is a player who plays the give and go really well. I think his usage of his passing is a lot better than the puck skill in isolation. He doesn't have the widest arsenal of passes. I think he can add different passes to his arsenal to make himself even more effective. Slip passes, hook passes, using his backhand more effectively on his passes as well. But he's a player who consistently does two things. He plays give and go really well, and he plays area passes really well. And those are big, big signs of hockey sense, which we'll get into more in the second segment. But in terms of the passing and isolation, I'd give him probably a 7 or a 6.5, something in that range. Do you agree on that end?
I do. I think there's been some viewings where I'd have him at like a 6, and some viewings where I'd have him at the 7.5. Like there's been
Yeah,
some variance there. I agree that his playmaking arsenal is not as developed as his goal scoring arsenal, which we'll get into in a second.
yeah,
But he's a really intelligent playmaker. He uses his motion and his speed and his pace to open up passing lanes, and he thinks the game at a really, really quick pace and can really pounce on those openings when they occur.
yeah,
So he's a very capable playmaker, but he lacks the adaptability in his playmaking arsenal, especially at lower paces,
yeah.
to be like the best creator in like the draft class in terms of the playmaking aspect. He's not quite there, but it's pretty close, and it's also an improving tool. Like it's
Yeah.
already come multiple steps since last season, and yeah, I think that also like the passing accuracy is a real strength. So when he sees a lane and he like spots it and takes it, it's going to be a really, really accurate tape to tape pass and
Yeah.
really facilitate his teammates to put those chances in the back of the net. But there's also a reason that he has more goals and assists so far this season with Boston University. Like he has 22 goals and 19 assists for 41 points through 25 games, which is absurd.
Yeah.
And also indicative of the goal scoring really being a more potent tool at this stage than the playmaking. And a lot of that comes down to the mechanics of the shot, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about a tool that is really developed with Celebrini. I mean, his shot, not just in terms of his one timer, like obviously his one timer is fantastic. He's got so much power and accuracy on it. But he's got a variability in his goal scoring elements that is really interesting. He can shoot off the back leg, off the front leg, off weight, well centered, from a standstill, in motion. Like every single shot you can think of, like even his backhand shot is pretty interesting when he gets when he gets set up for it. But yeah, overall, there are just so many ways that he can punish goaltenders with his wrister and with his one timer. I haven't seen him use the slapper a lot, but that's kind of a dying breed. I don't think a lot of players are just walking in and slapping it. But when he gets set up, I mean, especially on that power play half wall for BU. He's been absolutely lethal for Boston University. And it's pretty funny to see that the top goal scorer in the Hockey East Conference is a 17-year-old playing in the NCAA. Like if you look at other teams in the NCAA, like Quinnipiac, which won the NCAA last year, won the NCAA tournament, their average age was like 22, 23. Like there are some old teams in here, and he's dominating them and doing really, really well with his puck touches. So yeah, this is a player who really uplifts his puck skills when the competition gets tougher. Like he's a real clutch player as well on top of all this. But the shot in isolation, I'd give it a solid 8. Like it's a really good tool in his arsenal. I'd say it's the bona fide tool of the trifecta. Like of his
Yes.
handling, his passing, and his shooting. The shot's a good like step ahead of the rest, right?
For sure, I fully agree. I think I might be even a bit more generous. Like I think
Yeah,
there've been some viewings where I've seen the shot be like a 9 caliber tool,
yeah,
but I'd probably bring it down to like an 8.5 on average. But I'm really close to just giving him a straight 9 in
yeah,
that front because it's such a mature tool as well. Like the way that he's able to use it in any situation when he's off balance, like it's still so potent, and he's become really deceptive with his release as well. And he's starting to layer playmaking into fake shots and really, really using it as a tool to create space as well for his teammates and
yeah.
to execute like a gravitational pull on defenders and try to use his playmaking skill to kind of like take advantage of that. So I'd honestly give him a 9 in terms of the shot, just because of just how much also it opens up for him in all other facets of the game.
For sure, and for reference for our listeners and viewers, Cole Caulfield's shot is probably a 9, right? Like
Yeah,
this is a type of. I mean, we reserve our tens for the best of the best, the cream of the crop. So think Connor Bedard
Connor Bedard.
skating, Connor Bedard's shot, Connor McDavid skating, like that's a 10 for us. But we're not as generous to give him a 10 for shooting, but overall, Celebrini has a fantastic shot. But that wraps things up for the trifecta of puck skills. Now we'll get into the tools and habits a bit more in our second segment after these messages from our sponsors over at Sleeper.
It's almost the halfway point of the NHL season, but there's still time for you to get in on the action with Sleeper. Sleeper is our number one choice for your daily fantasy hockey needs here at the Locked On NHL Podcast Network. That is because to win 100 times your money on Sleeper, all you need to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 specific player stats. And you can get really creative with those, whether you want to play it safe and bet on, I don't know, Nikita Kucherov garnering an assist or a goal in the next game because he's been on absolute fire this season, with the exception of the All-Star game. Or maybe the young studs of the league, like Leo Carlsson's playing some pretty good hockey. Connor Bedard is back playing hockey. There's a lot going on with the young studs in the NHL at the moment. So use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll be talking a bit more about Celebrini's toolkit and habits. Before we end things off here, I do want to mention the skating with Celebrini because it's a big part of his toolkit overall. This kid has wheels. I mean, he's got a great amount of pace to his game, but I've also seen him use his pace a lot better, and that's part of the toolkit. It's not just skating at a high speed; it's also leveraging speed differentials, slowing down when you need to, and then speeding back up, catching players flat-footed with quick acceleration after kind of breaking in the offensive zone, stuff like that. I mean, I think Celebrini's usage of his skating is among the best in this class. I give him a solid 8.5, 9 for that. It's a great part of his game, but I think we can talk about the hockey sense as well because that's a big part of what makes Celebrini so effective, right?
Huge part. And like, first of all, yeah, the wheels are real with Celebrini. He's incredibly pacey, so quick, and his speed is one of his most potent tools, which is saying something because of just how varied his arsenal there is. But
Yeah,
the hockey sense is off the charts with him. Like he not Connor Bedard level on that front, but we really aren't doing prospects justice in comparing them to Bedard. But if we're
yeah,
comparing it to last year's draft class, like if you compare Celebrini to players like Leo Carlsson and Adam Fantilli, in terms of how he understands the game, I think that Celebrini is a pretty clear cut above those two, and that's really
yeah,
saying something. So Celebrini processes the game really quickly. He has a really solid foundation of habits. Like, I think that like his off puck engagement is pretty consistent at the NCAA level, and he's not even 18 yet.
yeah,
On top of that, the way that, as you mentioned, he uses his skating, he has a really complex understanding of how he's able to leverage his high end tools to create advantages. He
yeah,
knows just how well he gets around the ice, and he uses speed differentials so liberally because he knows that he can create space for himself, and he knows that when he has space, he can do some really special things with the puck on his stick. So
yeah,
he's incredibly intelligent, and while there are certainly still areas where he has to mature, like I think that the defensive engagement's a lot stronger than the understanding of where he has to be at all times in defensive zone. But he's already more than treading water defensively in the NCAA as a high octane offensive 17-year-old center. The
yeah,
defensive game will come, especially with the foundation of hockey IQ. So yeah, it
yeah.
is entirely one of the key components of his game.
Absolutely. And last time we checked, because Tableau is down right now, but last time we checked with Mitch Brown and Lassie Allen and his tracking project, he was around the 40s or 50s in terms of percentile for defensive ability
Yeah,
in the NCAA, which, like, first, we're talking about a 17-year-old whose
by
bread
far
and
the
butter has
youngest player
always been
in
his
the league.
offense. Yeah, like,
Yeah.
I mean, his bread and butter is offense, and he's still, like, about average defensively, which is fantastic for a 17-year-old playing in the NCAA. Like, that's just unheard of. But in terms of habits, I really want to talk about this because the way he plays fits so much with his habits. This is a player who consistently attacks downhill, who consistently just takes players head on, who's comfortable attacking the middle off transitions. Like I think in terms of transition offense, he has a chance of becoming one of the best in the NHL at creating
Certainly.
off the rush, right? So in those aspects, like there are some sequences he's created in transition with Boston University that have reminded me so much of Nathan McKinnon, of just putting players on their heels and forcing them to back off of him, and then just accessing the slot to just slip a pass under a stick, or to just take a shot through a screen, like that kind of thing. Um, Overall, I think that fits so well with his tools, that the combination of his habits. I mean, he's tailored his habits around the way around his tools so well. Like I can't name you a player whose habits and tools match as well as Celebrini's, right?
For sure, it's also a testament to his intelligence, right? Like, he knows exactly how to mold his game with what he has available to him, and,
Yeah.
yeah, like, I think that with the habits, also the really impressive thing is that he's a really quick learner. Like, we've been
Mhm.
seeing, like, the progression on a week-to-week basis in the NCAA this season's been really quite impressive, and
Right.
there's a reason that he's continuing to put more and more and more distance between himself and the rest of the pack as the season has progressed, because he's finding his niche in Boston. He's getting comfortable in that environment, so the tools and the habits are just completely taking over now, and he's just having fun with it, and it's very entertaining to watch.
Absolutely. I'd say even his positioning off the puck has gone so much better since last
Yeah,
year. He was playing with the Chicago Steel last year. And there were some, I mean, I'd say he was a really rush heavy player. He wasn't really,
certainly, yeah,
it took him some time to get up to par in terms of his off puck positioning in the offensive zone, his cycle play.
yeah,
I'd say this year that's the most notable improvement, is that's turned from probably a below average ability to a bona fide strength of his in his game. He's become a really good separator in the offensive zone. He's playing these small give and goes in space once he gets the puck off the cycle. He's moving off the boards really well, and overall just making himself an option constantly and consistently. But that also translates to the defensive zone, where he's constantly aiding his defensemen in breakouts. He's not blowing the zone. He's circling low and making himself an easy outlet option when he sees that his defenseman's got someone on his back. He can read pressure really well. Like even if he has his back turned to open ice and he's facing his defenseman, once he collects a puck, it feels like he already knows where his opponents are and whether he has space or not to turn and make a play. And the thing with Celebrini is he already doesn't really need space to make a play. He already doesn't need a lot of time to make a play. So the fact that he's able to identify whether or not he has that space is a big separator for me. It makes him, that's one of the most effective things in his transition game, is that he constantly has a feel for what's going on behind him, even when his back is turned. And that's a testament to his scanning tools as well, right?
yeah,
Like he's a
big
player who
time.
constantly keeps a map of what's going on around him. Um, but what else in his habits do you find really stands out? Because like there are still a couple things that I'd say we could spend an hour discussing with Celebrini in terms of habits, right?
For sure, I think like one development that I've really liked this season in the NCAA for him is just how much he's been able to integrate lane switches in his rushes. Specifically, he was quite
Yeah.
linear last year with the Chicago Steel because he didn't need to be anything else to be dominant in transition against
Mhm.
USHL competition. But this year in the NCAA, there's a lot less space for him, so he can't just sprint down in a linear line and just gain the zone and
Yeah.
be in the offensive zone and have possession and be dangerous. He's needed to really add complexities to his rushing game, and that's also been a testament to just how strong of a puck rusher he is, that he has been able to adapt like that in seemingly a blink of an eye. And he's consistently attacking up the middle lane, but he's never afraid to switch towards the wings if there's more space there. And he always then goes right back towards the middle as soon as he's off puck in the offensive zone. Very middle driven, very, very projectable in terms of he gets to high danger areas and he gets the puck to high danger areas really consistently, but he also knows how to adjust his routes with how the defensive structure develops when he's attacking them, and to create holes and attack those specifically to weaken defensive structures. So that's been one thing that I've been really impressed of this season, because
Yeah.
it went from something that he just didn't even need to practice last year very much to a massive strength this season.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's not just this, using his skating himself to switch lanes. It's using give and goes to access a different
Exactly.
lane and create
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
different
yeah, for
lane.
sure.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting in terms of development in his game. But now in our final segment, we'll finally talk about the projection, what we expect him to be at the NHL level, what kind of style he'll probably be playing in the NHL, and which team would be the best fit. We'll get into that after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. You can bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and far more. I know I personally am always a very big fan of same game parlays, especially when I'm going to a game live. There's nothing more exciting than having a few very specific and carefully chosen bets that you can cheer for to make the action all the more exciting when you're attending a game yourself. Just visit fanduel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
Alrighty, so let's close things off with our projection of Macklin Celebrini's game, what we expect him to be in the NHL, and which team would be the best fit. So let's start off with the projection here. I think there's a very clear, very easy path to becoming the best player on his team if he's drafted by anyone other than Chicago, right? In this range?
Indeed, yes.
Yeah, like it's very very simple and straightforward to Celebrini. Like I said earlier, he reminds me a bit of Nathan McKinnon in transition, and I think he can play a very similar role on a team where, he can become among the best in the NHL at creating off the rush, at breaking ankles, at using his speed intelligently to kind of slow down, speed up, and create his way into a dangerous scoring chance in the offensive zone. I think he's definitely going to be a bit more of a goal scorer than a playmaker unless something really changes on that end. Even though he's really creative, really inventive, and really smart with his usage of his passes, his NHL tool that stands out the most right now is his shooting by far. And for me, I think it's definitely the most projectable of the trifecta with the puck. And yeah, I mean, we're talking about a player who, especially if he's paired with a playmaker, can become what, a 40 goal scorer, 50 goal scorer.
At
Like, what's the
least,
ceiling?
at
What's the
least
ceiling for
like
him? Yeah,
and stealing in what today's NHL, where goal scorers are beating goalies a lot more than they were like 5 or 7 years ago.
yeah,
I could see him being a 50 goal scorer, like the shot and the goal scoring habits, and now the off puck instincts, which have just magically appeared this season.
yeah,
I think really give him that type of upside. And of course, it's highly dependent on the system that he's playing in, the role that his coaches see him playing in, and the players that he's playing with. Like, there's so many factors there, but yeah, he has the upside to be a 50 goal scorer, but he could also maybe be more effective if he's like a 40 goal, 100-point, two-way like beast, right? Like that's
yeah,
entirely within the scope of possibility as well, because he has that foundation of intelligence and consistent motor. Like, he has a wicked motor. He's constantly working really hard, and he knows exactly where to target that work in order to make a big difference. And if he's able to apply that as well defensively as he's been really able to apply in the offensive zone on the cycle this season, then we're going to have a really scary player on our hands. And
yeah,
the ceiling with him is interesting because it has a lot less to do, in my mind, with the potential points that he could put up. Because I think there are worlds where, like, look, if he ends up on a team with like two other superstars on his line, he could hit 140 points someday. It's possible.
yeah.
But I think that the value with him comes in the fact that he's going to be likely the best player on his team game in, game out pretty consistently, and potentially even in all three zones, which is just salivating for NHL teams.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that there's definitely room to grow in his defensive game. I think his positioning isn't always ideal. Sometimes
Yeah.
he back checks a bit lazily. Like, you can tell this year that he's going all in for offense, but at the same
Yeah, for
time,
sure.
when he decides to get engaged, when he decides to get involved in board battles, more often than not, he comes out with the puck. So his gauge of when and not, when to get involved and not is pretty good, and I think that can get even better with time. So yeah, I fully agree that in all three zones, kind of two-way monster with 40 goal upside, with 100-point upside, I think is more than realistic for Celebrini. And again, we're talking about a player who, unless he's drafted by the Chicago Blackhawks and playing with Connor Bedard, is probably going to be the best player on
Which
this
would be
team.
gross.
It
That
would
would be
be
gross.
it
It
would
would
be
be unfair.
nasty. Yeah.
A center depth of Connor Bedard, Macklin Celebrini, Oliver Moore, and Frank Nazar would just like it's
And it
just
would make me
unfortunate for
cry.
everyone else.
Yeah, I think it would genuinely make me cry. Like you can't do that. That's not fair. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think that there's so much to love about Celebrini's projection. I think that overall we're talking about a player who, you know, has so many different tools and so many different habits and elements to his game overall that can hit and be NHL tools or already are that
Yeah,
it's I think, of all the draft eligibles and this draft, Celebrini for me is definitely the one that is the most likely to play in the NHL right away and the most
yeah,
likely to have a solid bona fide impact in the NHL right away. So
yeah.
yeah,
I
in ter-
I fully agree with that. I do have one question for you though.
yeah.
I'd be curious, like, what you've watched more of Celebrity than I have this season, so I think that you
Mhm.
can answer this question better than I can.
Yeah.
But what for you makes the difference between like your weakest viewing of Celebrini this season, what you saw in that, versus your strongest? Like, is that a big divergence, or is it very consistent? Are there concerns between that gap?
I don't think there's much of a difference. Like the weakest games he's played is because he was cheating for offense and those were the times it would come back to bite him, right? But overall, in terms of the tools he displays, the consistency that he displays in his decision making, the consistency that he displays in his habits, and the work rate on the forecheck, all of that, that is very it's astoundingly consistent with Celebrini. Like it's surprising how often he's the best player on his team. Like it's near a nightly basis, unless Lane Hudson goes on a tear and scores 5 points. Like other than those games, Celebrini's the best player on the ice 99% of the time. And yeah, I don't think that's much of a concern. Consistency is a big part of his game. But overall, which team do you think would be the best fit for him so far? I think I'm thinking San Jose, maybe Anaheim, although they have a pretty decent depth of centers already. Like, which
I
teams
think
would bring up? Yeah.
San Jose. I mean, San Jose needs more skill, especially down the middle. Like I'm a really big fan of players like William Eklund and Will Smith.
Mhm.
But adding Celebrini to that core would allow Eklund to be a full-time winger. With Smith, there'd be more flexibility there if he plays wing or at second line center. Like I think that would be just disgusting of having two lines where you have them pivoted by these really high IQ, creative, and adaptable players.
Yeah.
And I think that that would make a big difference. Beyond that, any other contenders? I mean, I'd be very curious, like if like somehow he ends up in Columbus or something. Like
Yeah.
that would be entertaining. I think Fantilli and Celebrini on the same team would
Yeah.
be a joy for me personally, just because
Absolutely.
these are the two best draft eligibles out of the NCAA that we've seen in the last decade since Jack Eichel, at least.
Mhm.
And having them in the same organization would be a ton of fun. But it would also not exactly be Columbus's biggest need at the moment.
Yeah. In terms of what teams need, Montreal has been looking for a star for how long now? I think that
30
this is
years?
yeah, something like that. Like since Alex Kovalev, like it's been a while. But yeah, I think Celebrini would be a great fit in Montreal mainly because he fits within their style of player, like really intense forechecker, decent defensively, but also a really creative player off the rush. And Montreal loves to play rush offense. Um, you know, he's probably not going to be in Montreal. I think that realistically, like Montreal's probably going to be drafting between 5 and 8. But if
Likely.
they win the lottery, like this is a great fit for him, and it would allow him to be the bona fide star on that team, which I think Celebrini can definitely be. Any last words on Celebrini? Anything you want to discuss before we close things off today?
He's very good at hockey.
Yeah, that's about what we have to say. So that wraps things up for today's show. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you thought of the episode and what you want us to talk about next, which prospects you want us to discuss next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day and leave a rate and review. It helps the channel out a lot. If for your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports. And make sure to tune in for our next show as we continue our prospects coverage and our prospect spotlights for the 2024 NHL Draft. This has been Haddock Alley Cash with Sebastian High. We hope you tune in next time.